The door opened by itself. The first time it happened, I told myself it was the wind. That's what you do, isn't it? You find the reasonable explanation. You reach for the comfortable lie because the alternative, the thing your gut is already whispering, is too heavy to hold in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday night. But there was no wind that night. I had checked every window myself, every single one. Locked, and yet the door opened. My name is Daniel Marsh, and I moved into the house on Cellar Creek Road in the first week of October. I was 31, freshly divorced, and carrying the particular exhaustion that doesn't come from lack of sleep. It comes from years of tension held in the shoulders, years of walking on eggshells in your own home, years of pretending everything is fine when every room feels like a courtroom. The house was affordable because it had been sitting empty for 2 years. The landlord, a quiet man named Mr. Hargrove, told me the previous tenant had relocated for work. He said it quickly, the way people say things they've rehearsed. I didn't push. I needed a place to sleep that wasn't my brother's couch, and the house had 3 bedrooms, a fireplace, and a kitchen with actual counter space. I signed the lease on a Friday. Moved in Saturday morning. By Tuesday night, the door had already started. It was the door at the end of the hallway. Not the front door. Not a bedroom door. The narrow, dark-paneled door with an old brass handle turned green with age. The door that led down to the basement. The door that, every time I walked past it, gave me the vague and deeply irrational feeling that something on the other side was completely aware of me. That Tuesday, I was eating leftover pasta at the kitchen table, half watching a documentary on my laptop, when I heard it. A soft, deliberate groan of old hinges. Then the unmistakable sound of wood scraping against the floor as the basement door slowly, steadily swung open on its own. I froze with the fork halfway to my mouth. From where I sat, I had a direct line of sight down the hallway, and I watched. In real time, fully conscious, completely sober as that door opened until it was flat against the wall. Then everything went still. I sat there for a long moment. I told myself, old house, warped wood, uneven floors. I told myself the latch was loose and a draft from the kitchen vent had caught it. I told myself all of these things with the quiet desperation of a man who needed them to be true. Then I got up and walked down the hallway and closed it. The handle was cold. Colder than it should have been, given the house was warm and I hadn't touched anything metal recently. It sat in my palm like something pulled from a freezer. I held it a second. Longer than necessary, as if testing it. I pushed the feeling aside. Went back to my pasta. Turned up the volume on the documentary. But I didn't sleep well that night. I kept listening to everything. The next week was uneventful, which was its own kind of cruelty. There's a trick in how these things work. They give you just enough normalcy to rebuild your confidence. Enough quiet to convince yourself you overreacted. Enough ordinary days to let your guard slip all the way back down. I unpacked properly, put pictures on the walls, bought a lamp and a decent coffee maker and a doormat that said home in clean letters. I was building something small and quiet in mine. I called my brother Marcus on Thursday and told him the house was great. Solid bones? I said. Fine neighborhood. Almost sleeping well. I did not tell him about the door, because I had decided, firmly and finally, that there was nothing to tell. That decision lasted exactly 1 more week. I was in bed reading, just past 11, when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, measured, with weight behind them. I put the book down and lay completely still and stared at the strip of shadow beneath my bedroom door. Nothing moved, No shadow broke the light, and then, from down the hall, around the corner, out of sight, that sound, that long, slow groan of hinges, that soft drag of wood against fluorobony. I did not get out of bed for a very long time. When I finally did, I turned on every light between my bedroom and the hallway. I moved slowly, the way you move when you're trying to pretend you're not afraid even though you're completely alone and there's nobody to perform. Bravery 4. The basement door was wide open. The darkness beyond it was total, the kind that seems to push back against the light rather than simply exist within it. I stood in the hallway and looked at it, and I had the very distinct, very unwelcome feeling that it was looking back at me. I grabbed the handle cold again, always cold, and pulled the door shut. This time I dragged a kitchen chair from the dining room and wedged it hard under the handle. I went to bed. I did not sleep at all. I bought a padlock after that. A heavy one with a reinforced shackle, the kind used on storage units. I mounted the hasp myself, drilling into the door frame with more force than necessary, and locked it from the outside. The key went on my actual keychain, so it was always on my person. That was a Wednesday. Thursday morning, I came out of the bedroom to find the padlock lying on the hallway floor. The hasp was still mounted to the frame. The lock had been opened, not forced, not broken, and placed neatly on the floor. The door was open. My key was still in my pocket. I stood in that hallway for a very long time without moving. Then I did what I had been avoiding doing since the beginning. I stood at the threshold of that open door and I looked down. The basement stairs were wooden and old, the kind that flex under weight, bare concrete walls on either side. A pull-string bulb hanging halfway down, just visible in the dark. The air rising from below was cold and still and carried a smell I couldn't name. Something mineral, something old, something that reminded me of the back room of a hospital. I reached in and pulled the string. The bulb flickered, then held. The basement was, visually, completely ordinary. Concrete floor, shelving along the far wall, a rusted metal cabinet with its doors slightly open, old water cylinder in the corner, test on everything except for one thing. In the very center of the floor sat a wooden chair, not old, not dusty like everything else around it, clean, plain, set facing the stairs, facing, with perfect alignment, the exact spot where I was standing. I went back upstairs, left the house, sat in my car in the driveway for 45 minutes, and stared at the steering wheel. I had a structural surveyor walk through the house, an electrician check the wiring, a locksmith change every lock. None of them found a single physical reason why a latched door should open repeatedly on its own. The surveyor noted the floors had a gradient of less than 1 degree, nowhere near enough to swing a door consistently open from a properly latched position. He saw the padlock hasp on the door frame and didn't ask about it. He was the kind of professional who has learned it's better not to ask about some things. I didn't go back down to the basement, but I couldn't ignore what was happening above it either, because now the sounds had changed. Where before there had only been the door, there was now something else in the evenings, a sound from beneath the floorboards between 10 and midnight. Not a random creak. Something deliberate. Something heavy being moved, very slowly, across a concrete floor, and sometimes much worse. Slow breathing, patient and rhythmic. Coming from directly below my bedroom, I moved my mattress to the living room, told myself it was temporary. Slept better that first night than I had in weeks, which should have been reassuring. In the morning, the basement door was open again. And the wooden chair from the basement floor, the clean one, was sitting in the hallway, facing the living room, facing me. I called Marcus that morning. When he answered, I stood in my kitchen gripping the phone and said, "Something is wrong with this house." He listened to everything. When I finished, he said quietly, "I'm coming this weekend." He arrived Friday evening, walked every room, checked every window and vent and door frame. Then he went down to the basement. I stood at the top of the stairs while he examined the space, watched him crouch by the heavy industrial shelving unit along the far wall. "There's something under here," he said. "Come look." I went down, because the way he said it told me I needed to see it myself. He shone his phone torch at the floor beneath the shelving. The concrete there was cracked along a thin, precise line. Not a random fracture, but a clean, deliberate cut. And beneath it, at the right angle, was a gap. A dark, narrow gap between the basement floor and something below it. A second space, underneath the basement. "Did you know this house had a sub-basement?" I asked. "No," Marcus said, "and I don't think it was built with one." We went upstairs, left every light in the house burning. Marcus took the couch in the living room. I moved my mattress back there too. Neither of us discussed it. Neither of us wanted to be alone. At 2:20 in the morning, we both heard it. The basement door opened. Then footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, with real weight behind them. They reached the hallway, came closer, and then 4. The first time, we heard something else. A voice, very quiet, very low, from somewhere in the hallway. Not quite words, more like a long, continuous murmur. Like someone reciting something they had been reciting for a very long time. Marcus and I lay completely still in the dark and listened. The sound went on for what felt like forever, then simply stopped. In the morning, the chair was in the living room, 3 feet from where we had been sleeping, facing us. Marcus left that morning. Not from fear. He made me promise, seriously and out loud, to leave with him. He stood at the front door and said, "Daniel, come with me right now." I told him I would. Said I just needed to pack a few things. I don't know why I stayed. Even now I can't fully explain it. There was something, a pull. The same thing that makes you read the last page, even when you're terrified of what it says. I stayed because I needed to understand what was happening in my own house. That night I sat in the lit living room with my keys on the table and Marcus's number open on my phone, and I waited. At 11:43, the basement door opened. Footsteps on the stairs. Slow, measured. The wooden steps flexing under real weight. The steps entered the hallway, came closer. A man stepped into the doorway of the living room. He was in his late 20s. Thin in the way of someone who had lost weight recently, not naturally. He wore clothes gray with old dust. His hair was matted. His eyes were very bright, the wired, hollow brightness of someone who hadn't slept properly in a long, long time. He looked at me without any surprise. He looked at me the way you look at someone you have been expecting. "You moved the chair," he said, in a quiet, perfectly conversational voice. "I keep having to bring it back up." I couldn't speak. Every muscle had locked. Every breath was shallow and too fast to be useful. "I've been here the whole time," he said, stepping fully into the room. He was slightly unsteady on his feet, the way people are when they've been lying down for too long. I wasn't going to come up. I told myself I wasn't ready, but it got cold down there. "Who are you?" I finally managed. He considered the question, as if it were slightly beside the point. Thomas, he said, I lived here, with my family, years ago. Thomas Alderman. A neighbor named Patricia had mentioned his name once, carefully, the way people mention things they'd rather not. The youngest son, the one who'd had an episode, the one who'd needed an ambulance. How long have you been down there? I whispered. He looked at the ceiling, calculating. His lips moved faintly. Then his bright, exhausted eyes came back to mine. What? Yeah, is it? He asked. I told him. The expression that crossed his face was not shock. It was something quieter and much worse. The expression of a man who has just had a terrible suspicion confirmed. 4 years, he said, almost to himself. I've been down there for 4 years. The story came out slowly over the next 2 hours. Thomas Alderman had not been a well man in his late 20s. A breakdown, he called it, the kind that doesn't arrive cleanly but pulls the floor out from under you gradually until one day you're somewhere very dark with no clear path back. He had found the sub-basement himself, had reinforced and stocked it over quiet weeks, had convinced himself it was the safest place below the noise and pressure of everything. When his family was told he'd had an episode and moved away, that was partly true. His family had moved. Thomas had not gone with them. He had gone downstairs. And he had simply stayed. For 4 years. He was the one who had been opening the door. Not always with intention. He had a hatch in the sub-basement ceiling that let him into the basement above when he needed water, when his supplies ran low. The basement door would sometimes catch and swing wide as air pressure shifted when he opened the hatch below, but he had been watching me through the gaps in the floorboards, had heard me settle in, had seen me find the chair, bolt the door, drag furniture against it. The chair was his. He'd carried it up and placed it deliberately. It was his way of saying, I am here. I am watching. I exist. He hadn't meant to terrify me. That was the part I could never fully put down afterward, that every moment of that bone-deep, weeks-long fear had been a broken man's roundabout way of asking to be seen, of reaching, however strangely, for contact. I called an ambulance. I called Marcus. I called the police because some things have to be done properly and in order. I sat with Thomas until they arrived. I made tea he barely touched. I didn't ask many more questions. I just stayed in the room with him in the light and let him exist beside another human being for the first time in 4 years. He didn't say much. He stared at the lamp in the corner for a long time, as if the simple, ordinary fact of it was almost unbearable. When the paramedics arrived and gently led him toward the door, Thomas stopped at the threshold and looked back at me over his shoulder. The door? He said quietly. I'm sorry about the door. I kept forgetting to close. It's behind me. He said it simply. No drama. No performance. Then he walked out into the amber light of the ambulance, and the door closed behind him, and the street went quiet. I did not stay in the house on Cellar Creek Road after that night. I drove to Marcus's place and slept in his guest room for 2 weeks and didn't talk very much. He didn't push me to. He made coffee every morning and let me sit by the window, and I was grateful for the silence that asked nothing of me. The cold door handle was explained simply. Once I knew, air rising from a sub-basement kept at near freezing temperature year-round. The footsteps were Thomas moving through the basement in the dark. The breathing beneath my bedroom floor was exactly what it sounded like. A man, lying very still, listening to me live my life directly above him. Every terrifying thing had a human explanation that should have made it easier. It didn't. made it harder. I live in a different city now. A flat on the fourth floor with no basement and a front door I check by hand every night before I sleep. The door has never opened by itself, but sometimes, in that thin gap between wakefulness and sleep, I hear it. Not a real sound, just a memory of one. Old hinges, slow and patient. Wood scraping across a floor in the dark. The door opened by itself. And what came through it wasn't a ghost. It was something so much harder to forget.